Hello! In this video series, we are going to talk about Angular directives. Now, you may have already heard that Angular directives are a way to extend the HTML DOM. Directives do this by allowing you to manipulate the DOM. That is, they allow you to add or remove DOM elements, change CSS class, or add or remove attributes on them. Their usefulness does not stop there. In fact, they allow you to manipulate the DOM based on some application data. So in other words, you could say that the directives link the DOM manipulation to application data. So let's create a custom directive and see it in action now. Here we have a basic application that pulls the top 20 news from Hacker News and displays it on our view. Here you can see that we have the title of the article and the username of the person that posted it. Let us focus on this little section right here where we have the ng-repeat. ng-repeat is an inbuilt Angular directive that allows us to repeat a template a number of times. So for each news article that we will pull back from Hacker News, we're going to display the information within this section right here. To start off, let us create a simple directive that will abstract the DOM that we use for displaying the information we pull back from Hacker News. This would potentially allow us to style this section without affecting the rest of the document. And we will extend this directive as we learn more concepts. Let's create a new file called postitem.directive.js where we will place our new code. Now, directives are defined on Angular modules. So let us first get the reference to our Angular module and invoke the directive API on it. The API takes in two parameters, the name of the directive and the factory function that defines the directive. The API also returns an object called as the directive definition object. This object contains all the information needed by Angular to configure and render our directive. Now, one of the most basic parameters is the template URL. This parameter points to a template file that contains the DOM that will be added. Let's configure this to pull information for our template from the file postitem.template.html. Next, let's create the template file. Let's go back to our view and take this section under ng-repeat and move it into our template. And now let's replace the section under ng-repeat with our new custom directive. Let's run the application and check out our results. So at this stage, what have we accomplished? We have extracted and encapsulated certain DOM manipulation into a more concise form, a form that could potentially be reused within the application in other places. Now, before we proceed further, let's pause and reflect on a few things here. As developers, if we were to implement a mechanism to perform exactly what we accomplish using directives, how would we go about doing that? In other words, how would you go about developing your own implementation of what Angular directives do? Because understanding that would help us grasp the concepts behind Angular directives. Let's examine that with the help of the sample DOM. Given that we know that Angular directives not only manipulate the DOM but also allow us to attach application data, we would have to first scan the entire DOM, starting at a node and traversing its children and sibling, and identify all nodes that have a directive on them. We would then extract the behavior for each directive, something we may have registered by calling some API, and apply this behavior. This behavior could be implemented by using straight JavaScript or jQuery. We also know that we have to associate application data. So if we could pass in the data when we register our behavior, then we can achieve some sort of binding with our data while we apply the DOM manipulation. And guess what? This is exactly what Angular does for its directives. Its implementation is broken down into two phases. One, the compiling phase that scans the entire DOM structure, identifies the directives, and applies the DOM manipulation. And two, the linking phase. This associates the application data in form of a scope object to the DOM elements. So the Angular directive compiler traverses the DOM tree and at each node collects all the directives that are present at that node. It then calls the compile function defined in the directive definition object for each one of these. This function in the directive definition object is the hook that Angular provides for us to define our own custom behavior. The compiler automatically sends in the reference to the element as well as the attributes defined on that element into this function. The attributes parameter passed in is an Angular object that wraps the attributes on the DOM. With these two arguments now available to us, we can go ahead and define any kind of DOM manipulation at this node. Now that takes care of the compiling phase. What about the link phase? Link phase is where Angular attaches application data. And how does Angular hook into this link phase? It does that by running a link function at the end of the compile phase. Angular expects the link function to be defined and returned from the compile function. So the directive compiler first runs all the compile functions, and these return a link function that the Angular collects and runs one after the other after it has completed running all the compile function. Now let's take a look at this link function that Angular automatically calls for us at the end of the compile phase.